Okay, so the question came up last night, and I'm gonna try and just record a video to answer it for everyone. It's a little bit clunky because of my screen situation. And I'm gonna try and show you my Bible software. Kind of what I see going on. So the question was, I made a statement on Exodus chapter 32, which was not our main lesson, about the golden calf and how it wasn't a different God, but the people of Israel were trying to worship the calf as Yahweh. Okay, and then I think the high school girls small group, they just had a question about that and wanted to see it from the text. And so there's a couple different things that point us in that direction. And in the English Standard Version Bible, it's not maybe as obvious as in other translations. And then I'll read from a commentary, and I looked at different commentaries, and they kind of all say the same thing, very similar to what I said. But just to show you, okay? So in Exodus 32, verse 1, when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, "Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." So the people's concern is that Moses has been the intermediary between God and the people. In fact, they earlier in Exodus they request that they don't want to meet with God. They want Moses to meet with God. They want God to be, one-on-one meeting with Moses. Moses has been up on the mountain for a while. He's delayed coming down, and so their concern is if the mediator doesn't go before them, then God won't go before them, right? If they don't have a representative. Then God's not going to go with them. Make us gods who shall go before us. Now, here's the tricky part. We're looking at the English Standard Version, and this word gods is plural. It's the plural of Elohim, which if you look over here in this Hebrew Strong's Dictionary, it says gods in the ordinary sense, but specifically used in the plural, thus, especially with the article of the supreme God. So in our English Standard Version, which I love, they don't put a footnote. Ooh, I skipped around a little bit here. They don't put a footnote, but if we switch to the NIV, New International Version, they will add a footnote, and it says in verse 2, "Come make us gods." So we can click that in my software, and it does it a couple times, or a god. So even though the word is plural, Elohim, which is why it's translated gods, the context seems to indicate this idea of a singular God who will go before them, right? Just as they've come out of Egypt, they've had God, Yahweh, the true God, going before them. They want a God who will go before them. We see that again later, where Aaron in verse 4 says, "These are your gods," and it's that same Elohim, which could be translated, if we look at the footnote, or "This is your God," and it's also in verse 8, which if we look there, this is actually God talking to Moses. "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt." Okay, so I'm going to switch back to the ESV. So they don't have the footnotes in this version. I think there is one with footnotes, where there is an ESV footnotes in my app, but I don't know where it is. I'm not going to take the time. So what it seems to be saying, right, in context, is if you just take it that way, the people want a God who goes before them, Aaron in verse 2, take off the rings of gold that are in your ears, your wives, your sons, your daughters, bring them to me. So all the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. He received gold from their hand, fashioned it with a graving tool, and made a golden calf, and said, these are your gods, or this is your God, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt, right? So who was the God that brought them up out of the land of Egypt? Well, that was Yahweh. And so they're tying together this calf with Yahweh. It's a physical representation of Yahweh. It's breaking the second commandment. And then in verse 5 kind of solidifies this even more. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, right? So they built the golden calf. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord. And that Lord, if we look down here, this is one of a cool feature on my software. It says Yahweh. That's tomorrow shall be a feast to Yahweh. They didn't rename this calf as a different God. It's Yahweh. They're going to feast to Yahweh. So that's what I see, like from the scripture, from the text, and then that's solidified here as I'll read to you this commentary on Exodus. And I didn't mark where I need to start, so start here. We must remember that Moses is the only means of contact that the Israelites have had with God. In fact, if we look back at chapter 20, verse 19, it was Israel's own request that Moses act as a buffer. Speak to us yourselves, and we will listen, but do not have God speak to us, or we will die. But now Moses is taking a long time to return from his meeting with God. In light of this, it's possible to read the story not as an act of godless rebellion, but an act of panic on the part of the people who fear they've lost their contact with God. There's more to Israel's act, however, than simply missing Moses and panicking at the thought of being disconnected God. They approach Aaron and refer to Moses as this fellow Moses, a phrase that in both Hebrew and English certainly communicates a sense of derision and contempt. It may be well that their reaction is a mixture of some panic and contempt for Moses. We've already seen such contempt in Exodus, and we'll see it again later in the Pentateuch. Perhaps the contempt here is a result of the delay. It's like a child waiting to be picked up from school. The parent is over an hour late, the child panics, becomes worried, and then gets angry, taking it out on the parent when he or she arrives. However we explain their motives, the Israelites will later be punished by God for what they're about to do. The root problem is what we have seen earlier in chapter 14, 10 through 14, a lack of trust in God. By making the golden calf, the Israelites adopt a pagan representation of their God, who had already demonstrated in no uncertain terms his mastery over the pagan gods of Egypt. Aaron responds to this threatening situation in a way that perhaps we can hardly blame him for. He tells the people to take off their gold earrings, which he will then use to form an idol in the shape of a calf. In light of the repeated references to gold in the tabernacle section, it is hard not to see the connection. By building the calf out of the gold, the people want what the tabernacle was intended to do, provide a concrete point of contact between the people and God. The choice of a calf is not arbitrary. It was a common idol image in the ancient Near East. It's commonly accepted by the Old Testament scholars today that the ancients did not equate an idol with the God, but it was some sort of earthly representation of that God. Specifically, it was thought that calves or bulls functioned as pedestals for the gods seated or standing over them. In this sense, the calf is analogous to the ark. This is important to remember because it's unlikely that the calf itself is being declared God by the Israelites, as if they actually think it has brought them out of Egypt. Rather, like the ark, it is the place above which God is enthroned, thus ensuring his presence with them. The calf is thus a pagan representation of the true God. Put otherwise, the Israelites are not saying that this calf and not Yahweh brought them out of Egypt, but Yahweh's presence is now associated with this piece of gold. By making the golden calf, Israel has broken not the first commandment, but the second. I don't know if that helps answer all of your questions or if it raises more questions, but just wanted to give some evidence for what I said. Thanks for listening. I guess this was a 10-minute video. I was hoping for 5.